everyone awake, or everyone's like absolutely exhausted and falling asleep because it's the middle of the afternoon. But we're leading the climate revolution, so you have to wake up. I am super thrilled to be here because this is a conversation that I feel like is being had in the corridors, but now we got to bring it to the forefront. There are so many women here who are leading the new climate revolution, and we need your voices, and we need you to be unflinching and say things that make folks uncomfortable, because we all know women are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And while they may not be leading countries, only 10% of leaders here are women, we are leading in the corridors, we are leading in the communities, we are leading in the boardrooms, we are leading in the labs and in the classrooms. So I want to hear from you. This is a very special event. It's a Women Leading on Climate event. I started Women Leading on Climate when I was a minister because I felt kind of alone in my own country, although there are very hardcore young women from Canada here. Who's from Canada? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. These women, they say things that make a lot of people uncomfortable, which is great. And so I've resurrected it, but we're doing this in partnership with Colombia University. I'm very excited to be joining the climate school at Columbia University. And also a great partnership with Time CO2, who's absolutely committed to being fearless in climate action and climate reporting. Okay, so we're going to get right down to it. And I am encouraging everyone here, especially the panelists. We don't have a lot of time, so make it count. Say your transformational idea. Say what you need to say. Say the things that you feel like you can't sometimes say because it makes people uncomfortable. Because, gosh, we got a lot of work to do. We are very far from where we need to be. And there are a lot of women who are not at COP, who don't even know that COP is going on because they're probably right now, many of them are suffering from the climate emergency, including Indigenous women. I was given these earrings by an Indigenous woman who said, "You represent us." So make sure you remember that there are a lot of people who are counting on leaders here. And if you are at COP in the blue zone, you are a leader. They're counting on us to push and make sure we stay at 1.5 and we phase out fossil fuels. Okay. I am not going to introduce the amazing woman yet. I do want to introduce an amazing woman who's going to do some opening remarks. So many of you would know Minouche Shafik, who is the president of Columbia University. She came from LSE, which is my alma mater, so I'm pretty excited about that. She's also someone who's been working in global development for decades and also pushing for climate justice and for gender equity. Minouche.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm so delighted that you've moved from one university that I ran to another university that I've run. I figure that double connection is particularly powerful, and delighted to be here today. Now, I don't have to tell this room that women are really important for solving climate change. We all know that climate change disproportionately affects women, especially poor and marginalized women who are at the receiving end of many of the costs, particularly adaptation costs, but also costs associated with bad energy choices. We also know that women are very good at finding solutions, and particularly because they're often at the front line of managing resources, managing food and energy for their families and their communities. We also know that businesses that have women at senior levels perform better, including perform better on sustainability. And I don't normally like to say that women think differently than men. I try and avoid that kind of stereotyping. But there is something about, I know in my own field in economics, for example, you can show that we have very few women in economics, for starters, only about 30% in my profession, which is very, very low. but that the women who are economists tend to focus much more on social impacts, on how poor people are affected by certain economic policies, by what's happening in the labor market, and are the outcomes fair. And I would venture to guess would be slightly more focused on the sustainability of economic choices than others. And so there are all sorts of reasons why everyone needs to be represented, but there are some very particular reasons why having more female voices in this debate is very, very important. I think at Colombia we're particularly proud of some of our legacy. The actual term global warming was invented at Colombia by scientists at Columbia doing research on earth sciences. We have the Global Energy Policy Center, which is one of the world's leading institutes looking at energy policy. And in 2020, we launched the first climate school in the world, the first standalone school dedicated to working on climate issues. And just last week, we announced 2 female additions to the Columbia Climate School, Catherine McKenna and Melissa Lott, who I think is also here and joining us. So we're very proud of that. And I think we're just looking forward to this debate today and hearing from all the extraordinary women in this room how injecting more female voices at this time of enormous urgency can make progress on climate change happen even faster. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Minouche. And I must say, if you don't have this shirt yet, this is a Columbia shirt. So Columbia University, you all need to get one. So now we're going to have a little discussion. Justin Worland, who's Times leading correspondent here at COP, we're going to have a little discussion about like women leading on climate and just why.
Great. Okay. So.
Does everyone like the swag? Hope you all got a button. They're going to be in high demand. They're going to be like going up for really high prices soon.
I can just working now. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you first off for inviting me. It's really quite an honor to be just having this quick discussion with you. I just want to start really broadly, and you alluded to it on the podium, but why did you start an organization for women leading on climate?
Well, when I was minister, before it was very cool to be like associated with Barbie, I was nicknamed Climate Barbie by people who were kind of the haters on climate action. We were fighting for a price on pollution in Canada. We landed it, although you always have to fight for every policy you get. And suddenly online in particular, but it jumped offline. I mean, folks were really, focused on diminishing who I was. I was just a person who was trying to work on climate. I didn't know that I also had to take on gender and women, but then I was fine with it. I was like, okay, well, I didn't love the Climate Barbie, but I guess now that we have the Barbie movie, it's cooler, as my kids tell me. But I decided, okay, we need women across the board to stick together, because sometimes it is hard and it can feel lonely. And I'll tell you, with the negotiators here, even though you hear that I think close to 40% of the delegations, country delegations, are women, very, very few lead negotiators are women. The difference in Canada, I will say, we are one of the top. We have a lot of negotiators that are women. And so I actually think networks of women are really important. I've been thinking about this a lot more because let's be clear about COP. There are very serious challenges with COP. I think COP reform agenda is something we need to talk about post this COP. And I think for transformational change, we're going to have to look outside of COP too, maybe more outside of COP than ever. And when I look at all you women here, I look at women in Indigenous communities, in marginalized communities in the global South. I've seen so much amazing action that is transformational, including women in the courtrooms. A lot of the litigation is being led by women. So I just think this network of all women, it's not an elite group of women, it's every woman who cares about climate and is working hard in their community. We need to actually be raising their voices, but also supporting the transformational change that we really need.
you've mentioned both in the podium and then here the fact that the minority, both of leaders here, Climate Action Summit, you said 10%, and the negotiators is, you said close to 40% are women. And I guess I'm just curious how you see that playing out. Are there areas where that's had results that perhaps are troubling?
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at our former climate negotiator, Catherine Stewart, so she can probably tell you about the room. There was a stat that's interesting because UN Women does stats post-COP that you can go find. Everyone's committed, just like everyone's committed to 1.5. Everyone's committed to half their negotiators being women. Some have almost no women. But I mean, there are real wins. And when I was minister, we fought very hard for the Paris Agreement to recognize gender and the disproportionate impacts on women. And there is a gender action plan. Whether it's actually implemented as much as it should be, who knows? And it's supposed to be mainstreamed through NDCs. So I think that's an example of the win. But look, I'm going to say something that's a bit uncomfortable here, but I feel like we have to be a bit uncomfortable. A person who I'd love to have here on the panel is Mary Robinson. You guys know Mary? Yes, we all know Mary. Mary has been a champion for decades about climate justice and gender equality. She and I have often done events together to bring women, including grassroots women whose voices we wouldn't hear. She had a conversation that we all have probably heard about on terms of the science of climate change, conversation with Dr. Sultan, and she made comments that made him feel uncomfortable. And she pushed back and she said, look, are you gonna commit to phase out? Are you committed to 1.5 degrees? Because the people who are hurt the most are women, and this is a conversation, it was literally a conversation about women. And that, he wasn't thrilled about that. And it's not to pick on any men, and there's men here, and there are lots of men who support women and lots of men who support climate action. But it was interesting because I was like, yes, we have to say things. Like sometimes it feels uncomfortable, and sometimes that's why you need more women, so you can kind of feel like it's okay to go say the truth, like we need to get a phase out, or we're not gonna say 1.5, and more women are gonna be hurt. And so I think that was an important moment, and that's what I think we all need to be doing. We need to talk, we need to say the truth. Especially with climate, we do not have time, and I look at so many young women in this room. You have grown up with the threat of and the experience of climate change. I have 3 kids. That is why I am doing this. I'm like, every day, I'm like, are we really not gonna have a sustainable future for our kids? Are we that dumb? Like, what is going on? We know the science, we know the solutions, and it's not all gonna be solved by COP, that's for sure. That's why we have a diversity of women here. But I think we do have to push back, we do need to speak up, but we also need equal representation. That's equal representation at the highest level, at the leader level, that's equal representation in the negotiations, including the leaders of the negotiating teams. That's equal representation everywhere. And then I will tell you, when that happens, we'll get far closer to getting to where we need to be. I think there are a lot of men pushing, but I see women. I saw that at COP21. We would not have got 1.5 degrees if it hadn't been for Christiana Figueres, Laurence Tubiana, Mary Robinson, Jennifer Morgan, Kat Abreu, who I see, I think, in the room, but so many women, as Sharon Burrows talking about a just transition, so many women push so hard, and that's the power. We need to harness this power if we are really, really gonna be serious about 1.5.
What an amazing note to end our very short conversation on. But thank you so much, Catherine, for convening
I like this, staying on time. Anyway, thank you. And I do want to say, you guys have probably looked at Times coverage. I think it's really great coverage. There's a real commitment, and we need to see that in all publications because I think we need a frank discussion of where we're at. But thanks very much. All right, okay, so I'm going to go back to the podium, I guess. All right, okay, so once again, everything in COP is like speed dating or something, so we're gonna get everyone up. I will call you up. I don't have your amazing bio. I'm not gonna say everything amazing about you. So I will say one person who is in here is Laurence Tubiana. Unfortunately, she's sick, although I will give you a quote that she used the other day, which I thought was great. Hopefully she doesn't mind that I say it. I don't think she cares. Laurence said to me, when we when we think about biodiversity, we think about ecosystems. When we think about COP, we think about ecosystems. Boop-a-doom. Okay, with that, see, we also have to be a bit funny. So I'm going to call up, in no particular order, we have Helen Watts, the Executive Director of an amazing organization, Student Energy. Bogolo Kenewendo, the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion Special Advisor and former Minister in the Botswana government. Melissa Lott, Professor of Professional Practice at the Columbia Climate School, incoming, I guess I have to say that, and Senior Director of Research at the CEPA Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia, also an engineer. We have Eduarda Zoghbi, Development Officer at Rocky Mountain Institute, a board member at Student Energy, and also pushing hard because we're going to have COP30 in Brazil. And we have Paloma Costa, a young climate activist from Brasilia and youth advisor to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Oh. So, unfortunately, we're going to do this quite fast. I did an event with Secretary General, and I actually finished half an hour early because I got the timing wrong. So we won't finish half an hour early here, but we will try to stay kind of on time. So, Paloma, I know that you have to leave, so I will start. Well, you're very nice. All of you are amazing because you've all come to this event when you have many, many other things going on. So you're creating a new generation of young people engaged in climate activism. I was on a panel with you, which is where we first met, and you were just fearless. You've talked about access to education, research, quality education, so you're linking it beyond. So how do we make COP30 in Brazil awesome and a breakthrough for ensuring that we get a diversity of voices? Youth, grassroots, indigenous women, we need them reflected in the discussions if we're gonna actually get real change. So how are we gonna do this to help support Brazil?
Hi, hello, do you listen to me? Yes, okay. I have this horrible voice because, you know, time difference, running out and so on, it happens. But answering on that, like these days someone also asked me, say like climate action in 3 words. And for me it was very clear, young, indigenous, and woman. If we have these profiles in presidencies, our CEOs, as ministers, leading really decisions, I'm sure we would have like a different and entirely different world. Because, you know, somehow, like, it's very special for me to be with Duda in the panel, especially because she was the one who moved me a lot to enter climate action when I was starting in Engaja Mundo. And this is the power that we have, woman to woman, how we mobilize, how we understand, how we can fear and feel together what we are seeing in front of us. So when you ask me what can be done, it's put these profiles in power. How many times we will see COP presidencies that are men, that are leading petroleum exploitation and so on? We don't want that. We want real change, we want differency. And there is a lot of campaigns that are on ground happening right now to change this reality. We have, for example, the Amiga, which is the Association of the Indigenous Women of Brazil, and they are pushing really hard for them to be able to participate. We only have like a Ministry of Indigenous People in Brazil because of the action of indigenous women. And there is no doubt this in our story. The other side that I can see and the other campaign that I can recommend is what we are doing with the youth, not only in Brazil, but also in Latin America, because we are seeing this as the COP of Brazil, but it is not. It is the COP of Latin America because it has been 11 years that we don't have a climate conference in our territories. So we've been working a lot to unite the youth in Brazil, to unite the youth in Latin America and build a road to COP where we can be included, where we can be negotiators, where we can shift and use education to learn and push for the things that we are seeing and that we know that is important. I just launched a fund for climate justice and young people, and that's how I believe we can really change the world for pushing initiatives. And I hope to come back next year after our circle and cycling is ended to say to you, these are the numbers, this is the impact that we do when we have actual resources. Because right now, only 0.7 come to young people leading action. And this is miracle what we do, and we change it a lot. So thank you so much for giving me the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We're all there. We're all going to be there and supporting you in Brazil. Gosh knows where the COP's going to be next year, but we will be there for Brazil in the next 2 years and supporting all your efforts. Okay, we're going to go to Helen Watts. So Helen runs a great organization, Student Energy. If you don't know about it, you should. I did an event with Student Energy, I guess it was in Glasgow, and I just left politics, and it was amazing because we had all these awesome women, many engineers, many women from, you know, all over the world, and they were talking about how hard it is for young women who want to get experiences, who are like, I want to be working in climate. And so you've been really focused, your organization is really focused on how do we accelerate the energy transition by actually motivating, by finding, well, I guess motivating, you don't need to motivate the women are motivated, but finding real opportunities for young people, but in particular young women, and changing this, the fact that they are so motivated to actually real action and real, opportunities for change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine, and so happy to be here with many familiar faces in the audience as well. So I think for Student Energy, I mean, first and foremost, if we look at the energy sector, the energy sector itself has a gender gap that is twice as large as most other industries and sectors around the world. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think something that I try to bring up quite frequently is we don't have a demand side problem from young women to get involved in energy. The energy transition through our programs, through the application intakes we run for our programs, we see consistently that young women are motivated to go into this space. But when they leave our programs at the age of, anywhere from 25 to 30, the drop-off rate starts. And we end up, coming to places like COP or looking at the energy sector at large and seeing, okay, 20, 30% are made up of women. So what's happening in that in-between space? And so a lot of what we do is really pointing to the fact that this is a supply side problem. There are not enough companies that are hiring and prioritizing hiring women. These companies are not designed or set up for women to feel safe and included. We're not providing accessible and universal access to training and education about the energy system and the diversity of roles that young women can play in energy. There are technical roles, yes, there are lots of non-technical roles, and we can't go down the path as well of just putting women into administrative and communications and events organizing roles, because that also is a pattern that we see again and again and again in climate and in energy. And so a lot of what's kind of kept me motivated is, like Paloma said as well, this women inspiring women approach to it. We partner with a lot of networks that really focus on building these networks and coalitions of women to really mainstream the idea that women have a leadership role to play in the energy sector. So we have a project that we supported through one of our programs called Girls for Rurals. It's in the Himalayas in Nepal, run entirely by a group of young women who saw that young girls were just not getting enough access to opportunities to take on off-grid energy projects. And so they designed this whole project, we funded it, we supported it, and now they're off to the races, like doing their thing at a huge impactful level. We partner with the Clean Technology Hub, which is based in Nigeria. It supports 60 women-led clean energy startups across Nigeria as well. And so it's really about kind of making sure that we're building these coalitions of group, power in numbers, to really make the case for why women need to be prioritized through funding and through access to opportunities. And I really appreciate that Minouche also brought up this economic argument. And I think if we really put this all together, we have the economic case for why we need to include women in energy and climate. We have the moral and ethical argument that I think we all being here agree with and understand well, and then we see the demand side isn't the problem. So then we need to talk about the fact that this is fundamentally a problem with the fact that energy and climate are still patriarchal systems, and we need to call that out more directly and have honest conversations about the fact that it is uncomfortable for people who are used to being in positions of power to give up that power and to give up more of that power to women and to young women, and that's, I think, just something we need to get more truthful about.
Nice. Well, we're going to go, that's like a great segue We're going to go to Bogolo. So Bogolo has great experience in this. You were a minister in the Botswana government. I don't know how many women there were, so that would be interesting to know. But you've worked a lot on the finance side. And how, in God's name, do we get more finance to go to women? Of course, women in Africa, women in the global south, but just generally financing opportunities that are led by women and making sure that we're actually supporting women that are greatly impacted by climate change.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Okay, we're back. Thank you all. It's great to share this panel with you. We were 5 in Parliament. There was a time when there were 22 women in Parliament, and now it's down to maybe 6. And we have elections next year, and we are worried that we might go further down. So that's just one of the concerns. I was actually having a little detour, having this conversation with some African women leaders 2 weeks ago during a time event about how do we prevent the reversal of women in leadership across the world. The perception of women in leadership is also going down, especially in Europe. Where there have been women leaders. So really, what is going on? How do we prevent this? How do we ensure that the path that has been so well beaten doesn't grow bushes again, and the younger generation doesn't struggle as the women in the 30s, you know? And I think this is something we really should engage ourselves quite deeply with, and then bring it into the climate space, take it into the finance space, and just ensure that this general women agency, not just presence, agency in these spaces. And there's a reason why I'm stressing agency, because there is empowerment for the sake of having your face in a space without really expecting for you to make the right decisions that will impact other women. And I'm hoping that that agency comes out. So, and how do we unlock finance? First, there hasn't been enough climate finance that is gender specific. Matter of fact, in this week alone, feel free to correct me, but I haven't heard any that is gender specific. And, there's so many studies around adaptation finance. For AFDB example is they need $20 billion for that adaptation fund. And last year we challenged that, well, in your own research, it says at least 10% of your adaptation finance should go to women. Therefore, create a gender adaptation fund. We don't have it yet. And I think that is one of the things we should be pushing for, either very deliberate percentages in the funds that are already created. The GCF recently announced that they are well over 98% to their replenishment target. And the US also announced that they will be supporting with $30 billion over a certain period of time. What we should be demanding is a very clear percentage that goes to gender lens investing. And this is not just because we think everywhere there should be women for virtue purposes, but as has already alluded to, this makes sense. It makes economic sense, it makes societal sense. Matter of fact, it also makes ecological sense for us to do that. We could go a little step further and say, where is a gender adaptation fund globally, broadly? Where's a gender climate fund? Other people will be a little upset that I'm asking this question. But
I'm
you
not,
said
don't
it's okay.
worry, I'm definitely not upset.
But I believe quite strongly, we know this, that if you do empower a woman, and we've said to some extent it sounds like a moniker, it sounds redundant, it sounds like a broken record, but it is the truth. You empower a woman and you know that you are empowering an entire community. So it is worth taking a chance in it. It was there in the Beijing Plus 25. It was very clear that if you want to deal with poverty, with inequality, you must invest in women. This was agreed by leaders back then. And it shouldn't be only about that decision. It was brought into the MDG, Millennium Development Goals at the time, then brought to SDGs. We are here now. Even in climate and climate finance, this should be right at the heart of what needs to happen. And it is a very clear development imperative we shouldn't shy away from.
Nice, I like it. I like that everyone's very blind. I also worry about the lack of women representation in politics. And the thing is, democracy and climate action are very entwined. So we got to fight for that as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump to Melissa. So Melissa, you spent decades as an engineer, but also as a policy advisor to decision makers around the world. And as we know, and as we experience, these spaces are... we miss you already. We know these spaces are often dominated by men. So how do we get more women in these spaces, and how do we ensure that they rise to the top?
Yeah, so this is one of those questions where people say, how did you create space for yourself? Because no one was creating space for you. So how did you create space for yourself at that time? And I realized how incredibly privileged my background was to be in a family and to be in a place where empowered women was just the name of the game. Like that's the place I came from. So it never occurred to me I didn't have space. So of course I stepped into it and I saw it. And my question is, how do we actually intentionally create space for women, but also all the voices that aren't allowed to have space at tables, so that when we do this transition, when we mitigate climate change, we're doing it in a way that actually serves us as communities, as people, as women. And so when I think about what we do at the Center on Global Energy Policy, where we have 70 researchers on my team, how am I personally, and how are we as a team creating a space where voices are heard, where women are at the table, where they were part not just of a conversation, and they're not just, though they do amazing work supporting our events and our communications and all of that, as do a number of men who are also excellent at those jobs, but they are adding substance to the conversation. They're in the middle of the research. They're getting opportunities at different parts of their career and saying, you know what, you want to contribute, here's a space. How do we help you grow? How do we support you in that growth? How do we help push you if you need a little bit of pushing to realize that you can achieve so much more than maybe it's even, I don't know, come into your mind that you could. For me, I have been spoiled because I never waited for someone to tell me, reach for the next thing. I was like, I want that next thing, I'm going for it. How do we create a space where we don't have artificial barriers to me reaching for it? And so that takes a lot of intentional work by women and men in the spaces of power and decision. And it's an effort that will never go away and we'll never need to stop in. So over time, within the place that I work at Columbia, we try to create those spaces very, very intentionally and bring awareness to the people, the students that come through our classrooms, about what it looks like to not have a space where people feel safe, where they can step in and be a member of a team and a full member. And hopefully that's the ripples on a pond. So it goes well beyond campus, well beyond my team of about 70 folks. That's a drop in the bucket when it comes to the world. I'm looking at former students, next to me, which is very, very exciting to see. And we see those people go and become leaders. That's a starting point. But within that, I will say I'm constantly working on my own awareness. We had an event through our Women in Energy program just a week ago talking about allyship and what it looks like to be an ally. Not just for other women, but for everyone who has a compromised voice in a conversation. What does that look like? What can we be empowered to do? And it was funny, in a sad way, to hear all of these anecdotes and all of these actual technical terms for things that are just my life, but I hadn't thought of it that way. I was like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. You know, oh yeah, I've definitely heard that conversation of, oh, well, she wants to be a mom someday. She couldn't actually be a leader too in the space that she's working in. She's going to leave work. So many things wrong with all these things. But what I found powerful from that conversation was a whole list of things that you can do actively. And also, I looked around that room and it wasn't just women. It was men who were saying, I want to do better. I want to step up. I know the world is better when we're all included in this and when there's more women in these rooms. How do I actually make that happen too?
I think that is very powerful because I think there, obviously privilege is a real thing, and diverse genders, the marginalized women, women who would never have the opportunity at the table because all they're trying to do is actually get food on their own table. We need to be intentional. I will say, to give a shout out to Prime Minister Trudeau, he just announced a gender balance cabinet, and he just did it. And I remember before it happened, everyone was like, oh, are we gonna find enough women? I was like, I want to kill you. Like, what are you talking about? We have so many women, and actually there's a lot of average men in cabinets. I don't know if you ever noticed that. And so he did it, and then it was kind of done. And I think obviously there could be more inclusion, although it was quite diverse. But I think that that is required, not just sort of saying, be really nice. You actually have to be very thoughtful when you do that. Okay, we're gonna go to Eduarda. I just need a time check. Anyone? I don't have my watch is dead. Okay, we're doing well. Okay, great. So Eduarda, I want to go over to you. Eduarda is a graduate of Columbia University. That wasn't even necessarily intentional. I was like, who's awesome woman? Like, okay. Eduarda, so she's working with the Rocky Mountain Institute, was formerly with Student Energy, I think on the board right now of Student Energy. You're originally from Brazil, and you've worked on a lot of climate and energy projects. So you really are passionate about getting more women into STEM in the energy sector. I understand you're expanding Colombia's Women in Energy program into Latin America, starting with Brazil. So we're looking into COP30, and I think that's really important. Like, I'm kind of like, okay, let's get through this. And then let's get to, focus on how are we going to be awesome in Brazil. So we had a little bit of a discussion with Paloma. How do we get more women, grassroots women, indigenous women, but also younger women and their voices engaged? That can be, your experience with Student Energy, but also as we go into COP30, and you can talk about COP reform, because we got a lot of folks at this COP that, wouldn't necessarily fit into the diverse, young women voices. So how do you think we should do that?
That's a tough question. First, let me thank you for being here. It's very hard to go after these incredible women. I will say, COPs. I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired of the following. This COP, I'm trying to follow more of the gender discussions to see how it actually is, because it's a bubble and it's already a privilege to have a party overflow badge that I can actually follow the negotiations and see who's saying what and if gender is mentioned. And gender is never mentioned. We talk mitigation, we talk adaptation, but we don't talk about gender. And we have this thing called the Gender Action Plan, the GAP, that was, I think, initially negotiated in COP25. And it's actually, a framework of things that organizations can do, that countries can do, and barely any organizations or countries have gender action plans. We only talk about gender in International Women's Day. And then here at COP, we have an incredible event like this, and most of the people are women. So at the end of the day, we also need leadership from all areas, including men, to be leaders by acknowledging that we have to be in the same spaces that they are. So somebody asked me, if you had one recommendation, what would you ask someone to do? Look around. Look at any panel, any space that you are. Do you feel like others are being represented? Because this is a very, very easy thing to do, and most of the time people don't do it. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, and you said, let's be provocative here, and then I kind of switched what I had in mind.
Go for it, be provocative.
And one of the things that I think drawn me to Columbia University into the program was that there was a Women in Energy program that existed. And in Brazil, I was already very interested in energy in college, but there were no climate or energy classes in the Institute of Political Science, zero. So I thought to myself, how am I going to do this? I applied to a bunch of internships in the energy sector, didn't get any because I didn't have energy experience. Yes, it's an internship. Isn't that how we get started? And then I saw this program, after working in the climate space, I saw that these guys are talking about gender. There aren't a lot of universities in the world talking about gender, so I want to be there. But what I would like for everyone to reflect here is that having an education abroad when you come from the Global South is a massive privilege. And I was only privileged to, be in these spaces because I speak English, which is another privilege. For the people that don't speak English, energy is still not within reach. Most energy research is produced in English, and it's not easy to understand. I know a lot of incredible Brazilian experts, Latin American experts, experts from all over the world that don't have the guts to be in a panel like this because they don't speak English. They're incredible. They're eloquent, they're amazing in their languages, but they are just scared. And it takes a lot of courage. To give you an example, yesterday I was in a panel that was highly technical. It was about unlocking private sector finance in emerging markets. And it was all men, and we stood up and we took a picture, and I got scared because they were at least 20 years older than I was. And there I was talking about finance. And then it starts, what do I know about finance? I'm not in the finance space, but I did have the best education in the world to talk about finance. So you have to build it within you to think, I'm representing all of us. Like, this is a moment, this is exactly the moment that we have to remember we can do it, because it's not easy and it takes a lot. And then my final point is just for companies, and I think Helen already talked about this, we have to find and enable these spaces for women. But in education, we need scholarships, because it's very hard to afford good education. And I think that when we are selecting people for scholarships, we have to be more mindful of different inequalities. So in my country, I already am extremely privileged because I know English. But when you're a woman, you have to think that your challenges, they double and they triple depending on where you're from, your race, your ethnicity, and your age. So like for young women, it's especially hard to thrive. So I just wanted to leave you all with these reflections because I hope we have more time for the discussion, but thank you so much, Catherine.
That's awesome. Look, I think we have to speak truths. I think too often at COPs, we go around, we have these discussions and panels, and then we don't say real things, like how hard it can be, including how hard it can be as a young woman, as you say, if you don't speak English, if you don't fit in, if you're younger, if you're speaking in a male-dominated topic or field. Okay, so instead of asking the panel here, because you're all awesome, and by the way, thank you to the men that are here that support women. We absolutely need men to be here and supporting us. We need diverse genders. We are all in this together. It's not about women winning or men winning. It's about winning on climate and ensuring diverse representation and equity. Okay, so who wants to ask a question? Okay. Anyone? Oh, we've got, And we're going to try to keep it short because I think we don't have a lot of time, so we'll just do a bunch of questions.
Thank you, Chief Bill Erasmus from Northern Canada, Dene Nation. I haven't seen.
I know. Hello.
I can't just call you Catherine. I have
You
to
can
say
totally
minister.
call me Catherine. I'm like not fancy.
That's where my mind is still at. But I want to say two things. When Catherine got in as minister, I was in Bonn at I can't remember the exact talks, but when the Liberal government got in, there was cheering in the hall because we're headed. We found out, and there was cheering in the hall because Canada's position was that really there is no climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And so people I didn't know coming up to me, hugging me. Thank God. So then COP, that was in October, the election was October, so then COP happens, and so we go to Paris. She's the new minister. I had already been chief for many, many years, so we met. Our instructions were to meet with her, to work with her. And I don't know the right word. What we can do is, we can do some things as Indigenous peoples that the state can't do, and the state can do some things that we can't do. So we agreed to tag team. And if it wasn't for Minister McKenna, there would be no Paris Agreement. Very simple.
That might be a little overstating it.
Not at all, not at all. And I challenge anyone that has threatened her or wants to threaten her to come and talk to me. I'm absolutely serious. But I just want to say thank you for setting up this opportunity. I have to think a little bit about it because I'm not from this society that thinks the way they do about women. This is a Western thought. It comes from it doesn't come from a collective perspective. It comes from an individualistic society that's dominated by men, and that's a problem. So I have 6 sisters, and I have 5 brothers, 8 after me. And we grew up in a family where we all help each other, you know? So
Well, thank you. And
Thank
we
you.
did fight. We will take credit together for fighting for recognition of Indigenous rights and Indigenous traditional languages in the Paris Agreement. That was very hard fought. We only got it in the preamble, but we got it. And then we got the Indigenous platform, Indigenous Peoples platform. And there are a lot of Indigenous women. As I say, I wear these earrings. You'll see it's red dress because there's a lot of Indigenous women who are not represented here and who are very impacted in the communities. Okay, so we have another friend of mine. That's good. Not from Canada, though. Do you want to take? Who else wants to ask a question?
We just have a question here first.
Okay, we have another one here. Oh, we've got one there.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you so much. Thank you for the insights. I'm coming from Zambia, Securities and Exchange Commission. I just wanted to pick your brains concerning the linkage between inclusive green finance and women. We are in the process of developing a national financial inclusion strategy. And one of the thematic areas that has been identified as being cardinal is inclusive green finance. And women have been identified as one of those underserved target groups when it comes to financial inclusion. So I just wanted to pick some of your brains concerning what advice would you give to policymakers to include inclusive green finance as it relates to women, especially
Probably
in
a
the
lot
sub-Saharan
of women
region.
could say things, but I'm going to think Bogolo is probably the best because she's spent a lot of time thinking about this and doing work on this.
Yeah, thanks. Access. Access is the first of it, especially for a financial inclusion strategy. How do you enable access? Is it through a tiered model? Is it through fewer charges? But accessibility of the fund that you want to create is right at the top of that. And we can engage a little further on this. But Catherine, I was thinking in response to you, and sorry, quick one. We have a climate champion, that's a woman, for COP28, Razan Al-Mubarak. And she has been really clear that her agenda is gender, indigenous people, and nature. And as a result, she helped to finance about 175 indigenous women to be here and got translation services for the women from around the world. And then managed to get, in part, a fund. Not just for women, but for nature and indigenous people. And I thought I'd give her a shout out because it's really been fantastic hard work for her. And it's been great for us watching her really try to get these things done. Because she said, what we're going to do is get the suspects unusual to COP. So I thought I'd give that.
That's great. That's great. Eduarda, definitely you got to put a word in since you were on the panel with a bunch of men. You have.
No, I was gonna say that's incredible that you're saying that because I saw her speaking today and I was like, the only person that talked about gender. And that just shows us that's what happens when you put women in power, right? I mean, I think Hillary Clinton was the one that said, well, if women were in power, we wouldn't have these wars, right? So I think that just lets us know. I wanted to answer the question, though, that was made, because I did some work already with development funds and mainstreaming gender. And what I really recommend is quotas. I know there's a lot of challenges with quotas. A lot of people are against quotas. But if you don't ask energy companies and bidders to include women in their teams, what's going to happen, right? So I think that's what we need urgently.
So I'm actually very pro. People always are well, we can engage, we can have competitions. I was yeah, and then it was gonna be 200. And then the microphone, someone heard me. It's going to be 200 years before we get any kind of equity. Okay, we're going to pass on. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Yes, so you want to go? Yeah.
Working, but I guess everybody can hear me. So Mother Earth is a woman. We are 317 weeks away from 2030 goals. So these men should remember that women are working faster because it's coming fast. But I want to tell all the women in this world, it's nice to have croissant talk, shake hands, and talk big, but women can face the shark. So every woman who's going against men, you can do better because men doesn't have balls to face the shark.
Ooh, okay. All right.
Thank you. I'm from Uganda. I'm a member of parliament. And so this is just to encourage you, yes, that things might be looking down in Botswana. I'm sure they'll look up very soon. But this is just to thank you so much for this panel, to ask for more collaboration where we're in the legislative space. So there's the judiciary, there's the executive, then there's us who have to put those laws into to make sure they're working, we establish them and make sure they're working. So that's one. How can we collaborate? Who can we talk to get even more training, more collaborations in the legislative space for climate change? Secondly, collaborations. Honestly, I just stumbled on this place because I was like, I'm done with my pavilion, which is Uganda. Now let me explore. And listen, I'm so glad I came because I'm going to leave with so much more knowledge and so many more contacts, so more collaborations. But thank you so much, and thank you.
Well, I don't even know the time. You'd think I'd have a watch that works, but we have 4 more minutes. So who wants to make a point? We're going to do speed round. 3 questions. Who wants or points? Oh, timeout. I've got a timeout. Oh, okay, we're timed out. Okay. I don't always listen to those, but I will this time. So I guess I just want to thank everyone here, the women, the men, diverse genders, anyone who showed up here, because this is a conversation we need to have. We need to be frank. It's about your own experience, so no one can tell you you're wrong in this space. And this is just the start. Women leading on climate is not supposed to be some like new thing that's going to be exclusive. It's not. It's just about a movement of people that believe that we need more women's voices, all women's voices, diverse genders, to actually push the envelope and do what we need to do. It's not just an aspiration 1.5. We need to limit warming to 1.5. Women and marginalized, vulnerable people around the world are already paying the price. I mean, in Canada, we're also paying the price. But I think that there's a real opportunity. So come up and speak to these women. I don't know if people have a bit of time, but stay tuned because we will continue this. Thanks.